Hello. The denomination that I decided to discuss today is the Society of Friends, also known as the Quakers. And the reason why I chose them is because I'm actually doing my final project on Anthony Benezet, a Quaker of the 18th century, who is very involved in the abolitionist movement. And I kind of wanted to see how the Quakers carried out his ideas and his efforts throughout the 19th century, because I just noticed in our texts and things like that, the Quakers haven't been given a lot of mention for the later half of the 18th century and the 19th century, and so I was just interested in what they were up to. So what were they doing? Well, as we read about the Methodists and the Baptists and the Presbyterians of the 19th century, we notice that they all went under some form of internal conflict and divide, and the Quakers are no exception. According to Bruce Dorsey's article, Friends Becoming Enemies, the Quakers actually undergo a pretty long-term division in the late 1820s, and it is a result of the 1827 yearly Quaker meeting where a longtime preacher, Elias Hicksite, gives a sermon. That sermon is then spread throughout the national Quaker community, and out of it emerges two groups known as the Orthodox Quakers and the Hicksite Quakers. The Hicksite Quakers believe that the scriptures are no longer inerrant. They believe that the blood of Christ is just man's blood. It does not atone for sin. He is not a God. He is nothing more than a man. And so they have really kind of turned upside down what the Quakers' traditions and beliefs were. And so you can imagine the Orthodox Christians still held fast to their belief that Scripture is the ultimate authority and the absolute truth and in the deity of Christ. And the main reason that the Hicksites give for kind of denying these truths that they held for so long is because they believe that they're irrational. And so their claim is that the Orthodox Quakers are rational. And the Orthodox claim against the Hicksites is that they are compromising their beliefs for social changes. Sound familiar to what we've been reading this week? Yes, it's very familiar. It just happens about 10 years before everybody else. And speaking of happening before everybody else, Quakers between 1755 and 1776 are also the first denomination and organization to ban slavery among all of their members. Actually, according to William Frost's Quakerism, the Quaker involvement in the abolition movement far exceeds any other organization or denomination involved in the movement in terms of proportion. Their proportion is kind of unbelievable in terms of the entire American population. And according to the Earlham School of Religion, the Quakers were actually a quintessential part of the American anti-slavery movement and the female anti-slavery movement and the Philadelphia anti-slavery movement. Quakers kind of dug deep wherever they could, and that the Earlham School of Religion also mentions two very prominent Quakers that are involved in this movement, which are Lucretia Mott, who is an abolitionist as well as a women's rights activist, and Levi Kaufman, who has a role in organizing the Underground Railroad and personally sacrifices to help freed slaves. And even with emancipation, despite their schism, the Quaker denomination does not stop after emancipation. They continue to give aid and raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, according to the History Channel, to freed slaves and building schools for those freed slaves. And they're also going to remain highly involved in education reform and the women's rights movement throughout the later half of the 19th century. And so even though despite the schism that they go through, they still have a united front in social reform, and I find it very appealing and interesting. So I hope I piqued your interest, and I hope you learned something new. Thanks. Have a good good night.